Brand credibility, the foundations for that for me have to be a grasp of reality of what people are actually living.
The kind of research you're doing will find the emotional hook for me to make a meaningful promise off the back of it.
Or maybe it won't. And this is my provocation. What a lot of people don't care about is brands. And what clients don't like to hear is that over the past 18 months or so, arguably for a lot of them, their biggest competitors have been energy prices and mortgage rates.
Hello there, I'm Rob Mosley and I'm the founder and strategy partner at Nonsense. And welcome to our brand new podcast, Masters of Credibility, where we will be discussing the topic of brand credibility and more specifically, really trying to dive into what it is that makes a credible brand. Roll credits.
And the Masters of Credibility.
Hello everybody, welcome to Masters of Credibility. Today I have with me, let's just be honest, an old mate, but also an awesome person, Mr. Mark Hadfield, founder of Meet the 85%, possibly the most exciting new ethnographic research agency in the country. How about that for an intro, Mark?
Thank you very much. I don't know about the most exciting, but I've just got off a call with a potential new client and they told me that some of their partners had heard of us and were excited about potentially working with us. That's good.
Yeah, and you're doing it different. You're doing it interesting. Can you just tell us a little bit about Meet the 85%? What made you do it and what is it and how's it different?
So my background is like 15, 20 years in creative agencies. Spent a long time in London, a long time in Asia. Running teams, working with some amazing people who I learned from, different cultures, different places, different categories. And then just before COVID, we decided to come back. Briefly joined an agency up here in the Northeast in Newcastle, really good people. But really I had this kind of burning desire in me, which was born out of a couple of different things. I spent hundreds of briefs, many years looking at audience insight, and I'll do this with my fingers a lot. I do this with my fingers a lot. Audience insight that just didn't seem to be the reality that I was seeing when I was actually going outside the agency and opening the door, whether that was in Singapore, Thailand, Australia, Britain. There was like this gap. And I thought, what can I do? Or can I do anything to address that gap? So I sat down and it was a bit of a life inflection moment. And I thought, I think I actually want to do something. I'm going to take the plunge and combine my passion for documentary photography and particularly reportage family photography. This passion for, I think there's a reality gap in what brands and agencies are doing. And this kind of burning entrepreneurial thing within me, which is I studied a master's in a course called Applied Imagination, essentially entrepreneurial thinking at St. Martin's College. And I just wondered, how can I combine those things? And I came up with this thing called Meet the 85%. And it was based out of a stat that I'd stolen from Martin Weigel and I'd seen online, I'd seen somewhere else online, which is 85% of the UK comms industry, brand industry, is based within London, but 85% of the UK population is based outside of London.
Let's be honest, we're all in Shoreditch or Soho, and that's not representative of the UK.
But this is not an anti-London agency, it's just a name. So it's about proportionality and understanding the reality of people's lives. So basically, I left my job, set up the business, thankfully haven't looked back, and I'm loving it. I'm just really loving it.
Well done. And I knew that, but I wanted the listeners or watchers of this to know that story. I think the best startups are when people are investing in a passion of theirs. But I also think you found a gap. You were quite polite about bunny ears in insights. So much things that purport to be insight are just not, they're just not interesting or useful, and don't feel authentic. And you know me well, and you know I've built Nonsense around a proposition of building credibility for brands. How are we supposed to do that if the basis of the work is not insightful in the true sense of the word? Now, I don't want to get into the planner debate. What is an insight? We'll be here forever.
Yeah.
But let's just say interesting and actionable, and that will lead us somewhere creatively that will do something better as a result. The beauty of ethnography and the way you do ethnography is that you can't consume that research without leaving feeling like you know what it's like to be the people in the audience, which I just don't think other kinds of research deliver. Let's just talk about brand credibility a little bit more. What does it mean to you, brand credibility?
There's a few things it makes me think of. We do this thing called reality first, brand second research. So even when we're employed by a brand, what we do, and I'm quite unapologetic about this, is we recruit people. We don't tell them which brand it's for. They obviously have to go through a screener, which makes us understand that they are a brand's customer, but we put dummy questions in there so they don't know who it's for. The discussion guide will have an element about that brand and what that brand wants to find out, but about 3/4 of it will be nothing to do with it. And there are a lot of brands out there who would say, yeah, great, yeah, I understand that. They still think people wake up thinking of their brand every morning.
That's what I was going to say. It's ego bias is
Yeah.
what, I don't think that's a real term necessarily, but what I mean is the effect of anyone working on a brand, agency or brand side, you tend to overstate the importance of that brand in people's lives.
Totally.
Even though you go home at night, switch off and don't think about brands for the rest of the bloody
Totally. So Richard in Saatchi, he talks about it as brand narcissism. This thought that there's research around brand love, brand loyalty. People don't think like that. Brands think like that. And that's why when I set the business up and the business is evolving, I'm quite unapologetic and trying to be as confident as possible in the offering that we don't have brand-centric research. We have reality-centric research. And if a brand plays a role in people's lives, if they voluntarily bring that brand up when we're having a conversation about things or the category or their day, brilliant. It's not like a traditional focus group, which is for the first 7 minutes we talk about this, and the next 15 minutes we talk about it. It's basically ebbs and flows because that's how human interaction works. But we give the participants lots of what I call conversation doorways to enter into a space where they might voluntarily talk about that brand or that category or that buying. Now, if they don't, and we get to the end of the session, and we've given them several opportunities to bring up that brand, and they haven't, there's learning number one. They don't care about your brand.
The minute you muddy the water by telling them the thing that you want to talk about, you are biasing your own research incredibly. So the fact that you even devote 10-15% of time to prompted stuff about the brand is probably still, as a percentage, more than that person would have thought about in their day.
And it's in language that marketers talk about. People don't talk about categories. They do go on what we would call a category journey, but they don't say, I'm now going to go on a category journey. And this big space that we've seen recently, which is, before you get anywhere near the category, is, right, do I have the money for it? And what clients don't like to hear is that over the past 18 months or so, arguably for a lot of them, doesn't matter whether they're an FMCG brand, whether they're a tech brand, their biggest competitors have been energy prices and mortgage rates. But they won't have that in their monthly brand tracker. Now, and I was chatting to a couple just the other week where they told me, even now the kind of the interest rate thing is settling down, they're coming out of their fixed rate. They've got the best rate they can, but their mortgage has gone up £250 a month. And I said, what do you do? He said, we're going to cut down in other areas. So that basically, the marketing language for that is they're going to look across different categories and pull things out. That's nothing to do with those category competitors. That's to do with their mortgage rate.
Yeah, but brands should know about it, right? Because I need to make myself more important than the actual competition, not the...
And this comes back to your question, brand credibility. The foundations for that for me have to be a grasp of reality of what people are actually living.
And for me, obviously, once you understand that, you then start to define a realistic role in that person's life for brand. I always say to my clients, the first thing is humility. Let's hit this with the humble stick, right? And understand how not important we are. Because seeking to build from a low foundation often gets you better creative. Then you're looking at, well, how can we be meaningful in a way that really matters? The kind of research you're doing will find the emotional hook for me to make a meaningful promise off the back of.
Or maybe it won't. And this is my provocation. What a lot of people don't care about is brands. Your humble thing is spot on. Get out the way. We did something for an FMCG brand a few months ago, and we visited families at home, and it was for a product that you find in your fridge. And we screened the participants, and we said, please, can you look in your fridge, and can you tell us if you have this product or brand in your fridge? And all of them had to say, yes, I do. Anyway, went and visited them, had conversations with them, observed meal times, went through their fridges, really interesting stuff. Two really interesting things happened. One, when we got there, they didn't have this product or brand in the fridge. They had the Lidl equivalent, the copycat. So for them, they had totally misattributed this brand to a key competitor that is gaining market share in this brand, right? Problem number one for our client, right? They don't even know whether they've got you in the fridge or not, which probably means all of the data you've got and all of the spreadsheets you've got are probably inaccurate. There's a big challenge for you. You've got to go and sort that out. The second thing was, at the end of the project, we got them into an online focus group altogether, and we had a chat about, okay, based on what we found out when we visited you, what we observed across all of you, we've got some interesting creative territories, and we worked with the creative agency to come up with some creative territories, and we played it back to them with no mention of the brand or anything. And they were like, all right, we love this second one. This is great. Okay, so you've told us you like number 2. What would we told you if it was for this brand? Oh, that's great. I can see how they would play a role doing that. That's good. One of the participants put his hands up. I'm paraphrasing a little bit. And he said, this is great. But my guess is this brand's going to spend millions of pounds on this thing that we're talking about. Why don't he just put those millions of pounds to make our products cheaper? That would help me more. Don't put that money into a marketing platform. Put that money against your profits and make the thing I'm putting in my fridge cheaper. That's going to help me more as a family. Now, that's a challenge to a business. That's a challenge to a marketing function. But that's the reality of what people are telling us.
It brings us on quite nicely to the first topic I want to talk about, which is brands or businesses making a truly meaningful promise. Now, you can make an emotional and a functional promise at brand level and at product level. So what good research should do is allow us to understand what might be the right promise to be putting out there in the first place. Do you see brands making genuinely meaningful promises? How good is the industry at it in general? And if so, who's good?
Anybody can make a promise, whether they deliver on it. That's the key. Brands have just got to deliver on stuff that's important to people.
In our little definition at Nonsense, we've tried to define these 6 pillars. And the way we define the meaningful promise pillar is it's a promise that the brand can demonstrate it's already keeping, but that also offers some challenge to the brand to work harder to keep it more. Like I actually love Just Do It, for example, because it's so big. Inherent in it is everybody can be their own version of an athlete. It doesn't matter if you've got my original Ronaldo at his current age physique or actual Cristiano Ronaldo's physique, right? Like you can still be your own athlete. And the best ad they ever did was, for me, was basically me running behind a truck, shot from the back of a truck, because I was that guy, getting out of breath after 500 meters. And they can keep finding new ways to deliver on it. And that's why the promise is meaningful. But they have to work hard to keep it meaningful. They have to keep delivering on it.
What we've got to remember here is we're looking at the pinnacle of the best marketing, the best brand, the best products. Okay, there are millions that sit beneath that. But what I like about the Nike one is consistency. This is the same line for 50 years now. 50 years, I think, something like that. The range of communications, to your point, the greatness side amazing resonated with me, all the way up to sponsorship of the elite athletes of the world. The other thing I think is really clever about is Just Do It, is it's call to action to people, right? They're not saying they're going to just do it. They're telling you to just do it. But what they deliver on with that promise is they deliver the kit and the inspiration that it doesn't matter what level you are as an athlete, we're going to give you the tools and the opportunity to do it, which I think is very powerful.
I think that brings me on to another point about what makes a really good, meaningful promise, is that there's a functional role for what the brand sells in it. And that's quite an interesting thought that I think's been lost by the industry at large. We're too happy to let go of trying to bake functionality and product into our promise because we believe it holds us back in winning awareness. We will lean into the highest possible social ideal or the highest possible emotional resonance that we can create with that person because we know emotion works in terms of awareness. But we're doing it at the expense of having product baked into what our brand is actually about. We can hypothesize that that's going to hurt the performance of these businesses over time. That's the central premise of my agency, that that's a bad thing. And I think we're starting to see it play out now in terms of some of the newer bits of research and some of the debate that's going on that's questioning things like the long and the short of it, which have been well established, held, sacrosanct things that strategists would never want to disagree with. But actually, there is more to it than just win pure awareness at all costs, and that's probably more to do with how we measure it, right? I've to a guy called Chris who runs an outfit called Corvidae. They do AI analytics, right? And it's just a bit better than cookie-based analytics in that it uses AI to stitch together much longer customer journeys So it shows actually across their whole client base, they're reducing CPAs by around 40% for all their clients. And the way they're doing it is diverting media spend into mid-funnel, informative long-form content that's telling people product information and product functionality and role in life for those individuals. But it's stitching that together in a way that isn't just make people love a logo over here and then shout at them until they buy over here.
If a brand can unlock that, and I'm not aware that anyone's unlocked the secret sauce there yet, that's where the growth's going to come from. Here's an example that I'm a personal fan of. Tesco, Every Little Helps. It's consistent, it's a promise, it's a meaningful promise. Acts, not ads. So it's in all of their ads, but it's in their acts as well. They do stuff in local communities, and they're there to understand what they can give people during tough times. It's obviously not just groceries now, it's mobile phones, it's blah, 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 a whole suite of things, right? That, I think, is a very meaningful promise. But yet, I've not met a single person that has mentioned Every Little Helps when I've talked about grocery shopping. And because they make their grocery shopping choices, they've got a portfolio of brands they go to that's based predominantly on primary shop, top-up shop. And their primary shop is generally the one that's closest to my house. But to your point, that softer stuff about promises probably does play a subconscious role in their head. But the reality is, it's which one's closer to my house.
We don't do attribution well as an industry. We have brand trackers that rely on prompted awareness, which I think, like going back to muddying our own waters from a research point of view, this many people knew who we were and what we stood for once we reminded them that you existed. How useful is that piece of information? We had to remind them that you existed in the first place, right?
Totally.
Before we could get you a number. And okay, it's useful if it's relative to the competitors, but like we said, that's category competition, which is not about decision making that people actually make. I think, really interesting. I feel like we've covered a couple of the next questions. I was going to ask you a little bit about your own meaningful promises to meet the 85%, but I feel like we've covered that off quite nicely. Your promise is a better kind of research that puts humans first.
Are we better? Are we different? I think the way we think about things, the way that we approach things, I know for a fact that the way that our conversation guides are constructed is very different to a lot of other businesses. But I think it's the way that we take that research, that insight in inverted commas, and we deliver that in a way that isn't just research findings. There's something more meaningful that we're trying to get to. There's something deeper that we're trying to get to. And then when we deliver that in a debrief, we don't just end with, here are the findings, like, here are some opportunities, here's a provocation, because we're from your world. We understand opportunities, provocations. So in one recent debrief workshop, I've written this list down because I always forget it, but this was a standard project for us. We went and met, I think, 8 people around the UK. We delivered a debrief with some video clips, observations, all the rest. But then we delivered 2 UX opportunities that would have given the customers a more relevant and personal experience at different points of the journey. 1 promotional idea that would have acted as a trial for new customers. 1 old product revitalization. 1 packaging investigation that was linked to sustainability, but also the perceptions of premiumness and touch. And we talked to a professor of tactility in shopping. That was fascinating. A marketing platform activity, which is something that they could use to drive culture over multiple years. 1 data-led experiential idea, so something that partnered with their owned data to deliver a unique experience, to personalized experience to customers. A whole new product line, because we recognized there was a part of their business overall where one of their brands was underperforming. So here's a new product line that will drive visibility and engagement with this particular brand. And then an augmented segmentation study.
I'm smirking a bit because you prefaced that by saying it wasn't necessarily better, and then just gave loads and loads of really good reasons about how it is better. I will say, like, you've got to have a good relationship with that client and where they can actually use all of that stuff. And Nonsense are trying to do a similar thing where we want to help you with brand and with content and with CX. Not all of our relationships allow us to do that because we might only be talking to a brand team or only be talking to the social media guys in content. And it's quite difficult sometimes to stitch all of those things together. And yet a piece of insight work that you've done is leading to potential executions in CX, in content, in brand. And you need a certain type of client whose ears, minds, and frankly processes are open enough to allow them to execute off the back of it. All of that list, I'm sure, is in addition to them getting a really rich understanding of the audience, which was probably the main point of hiring you in the first place. So let's just say it is better. It is a better form of research. And you know what? I don't know every ethnography company in Britain. I'm not trying to slag off your direct competitors, but I love the work that you're doing because of the richness of output that you've talked about, but more importantly, the core bit, really understand people's lives. So tell us a little bit about the book that you've just done.
We all learn in different ways, don't we? Some of us are visual learners, some of us are audio learners, kinetic learners, etc. And this is for the Saatchi & Saatchi What the Fuck's Going On in the Heartland project this year. And essentially, we ran a project with them where they were trying to understand what's going on in the lives of the middle classes, for want of a better term. And essentially, we conducted a bunch of interviews, observations in people's homes, really rich content. We gathered audio, video, visual. But throughout the project, I became more interested in oral histories. And I was reading an author called Tony Parker quite a lot. And I found a book of his called Red Hill, A Mining Community. And it's basically him in 1985-6 interviewing a bunch of miners and people associated with miners, so miners' wives, people in the local community, the police, people who worked at the National Coal Board, etc., etc. And it was essentially just interviews after the strike. And I just found it fascinating just reading people's oral account of what happened, because I've seen many documentaries about the miners' strike. Right? I've seen lots of photographs and lots of exhibitions, but people's words, and it really kind of stuck with me. And there's no photographs in any of these books. It's pure words. It's their words. So I said to Richard as part of the process, I sent him a copy of the book. And then I said, I'm going to do this as an output, because Richard likes to write a book, a Saatchi & Saatchi book, which is here. Here. Richard's book, the Saatchi & Saatchi book, is the strategic argument that's based off the content that we generate, with a lot of the content and photography. But I said I'd love to create a companion piece to that, which is an oral history book, which is basically taking the 11 interviews that we had and pulling out sections of those conversations. So it's those people in their words. And the reason I liked it was, one, it was something interesting to do. Two, it's that thing I mentioned earlier, which is it goes beyond running some research. We're capturing a moment in time in people's lives. From that, we created this book. Get in contact with us if you'd like a copy. And this purely is Voices from the Heartland, 11 people around the UK. We're not promising it's anything other than people's words, talking about their experiences over the time that we chatted to them.
There's a slight novelty factor, right, in just the research as a book, right? Because we've all paginated through 150-page decks. Like, it's either the two normal research outputs are ginormous deck or ginormous report, and both of which are too academic and leave people cold.
This is where different methodologies and different outputs really matter. Yeah, I'm working at the moment on a brief where there's some documentary filmmakers, and what I'm doing is I'm saying to them, I think there's one of our clients where we've delivered the big debrief, the 100-slide PowerPoint with loads of video links, and that serves a purpose. But can we create something from that content, which is like an internal Netflix series, that this client and their internal teams can watch? So it becomes the entertainment of watching a beautiful documentary, becomes a Trojan horse for the insight.
It's so smart. I'm going to move us on to our pillar about cultural contribution. We have this belief that culture is an incredibly rich fabric. Brands are at best only a small thread woven through that, and have to work very hard in order to weave themselves in. They have to commit in the long term and look to provide genuine value to culture. Do you think that's fair? And how would you help a brand, say, that needed to just understand a particular subculture better? Say, road cyclists. I want to know about them. What's the 85% approach?
Understand their reality. So let's say there was a brief for that, road cyclists. We've got to go out and we've got to recruit against people who have a bicycle, who cycle on the road. Probably there's a question about frequency and cost of bike. But what percentage does that play in their life? 5%? 10%? When they can get out at the weekend? When the weather's nice? So even there, it's about that, to your point, the subculture and the role that subculture plays in somebody's personal life. I think so. For me, it's about perspective, and it's about understanding the role that brands and business play in people's lives is small. Now, I think your point is an excellent one, which is brands that say they're going to drive culture, right? I don't know. Maybe I'm a bit cynical on this, but to your point, you need a hell of a lot of money. You need to physically be available. You need to be priced democratically in order to drive culture. You might be able to drive a moment or a meme, or you might be able to drive a subculture for an amount of time, but I don't think you can drive culture overall. I'm not sure it's feasible.
When you go down to subculture, obviously things become Easy. Our mate, who probably neither of us have seen for a bit, Jamie Coomber, when she was at Converse over in the States, I think she lived in Portland for a while, didn't she? And worked for Nike first, then Converse. They've got a long-running association with music, in particular the punkier end of the music spectrum. But I think she was quite instrumental in them opening up studio spaces for up-and-coming bands around America with a Converse logo on it, right? I don't think she invented Converse's association with music, but was looking at ways to genuinely contribute to the subculture of upcoming rock bands. That level of work is beyond the reach of a lot of brands. It's taken a ginormous effort and a long-term commitment.
I mean, it's, Jamie and you will know much more about it than me. It sounds great. And for their audience, it sounds bang on. It's very targeted and it's a great strategy, very positively. I was chatting to a client yesterday and we were talking about the role that one of their brands could play in culture around the UK. And we were talking about the gap that we perceive small towns, post-industrial towns, and some inner cities have because of recent economic circumstances. And if there was a role for this brand to play to bring benefits to the populations of those places. So it sounds very similar to the stuff that Converse are doing. That, I think, going right back to the beginning about meaningful promises, that's where it gets really exciting and interesting for me. Converse audiences want to know who the up-and-coming bands are. They want to go and watch it. Brilliant example. For this particular brand, it's much more mainstream, it's much more middle ground, and there are different elements in people's lives beyond entertainment where they need help. And it's not Tesco, but if you think of like something like Every Little Helps, Every Little Helps doesn't just mean they make your food as cheap as possible. They do loads of different things. That's where I think it gets really interesting when a brand plays that credible role in people's lives. It doesn't just promise and say things. And the only other thing I'd touch on this is the Converse example is brilliant. It's knowing your audience and knowing who you're going after and your thing about subcultures. Lots of marketing goes after the trendy subcultures, the cool kids in inverted commas. And there are lots of legitimate reasons why lots of brands would do that. Converse is a good example. But when I see a mainstream brand that has a mass audience going after one niche of the cool kids, they might go after many subcultures, which makes sense. You've got to be really careful, I think, with that, because why are you doing it? Is it for reputation reasons? It's not for penetration reasons.
Some of it's knowing your tribe as well, right? So like with the Converse thing, like the mass market trend move to have done sort of 6, 7, 8 years ago when Jamie was over there might have been to abandon punk and start looking at other, even within music, you might start going, look, like, let's see what we're doing in EDM. Let's get a bunch of DJs into this. They didn't do it because it would have just killed what they were all about and diluted it.
It wouldn't have been credible for them to do that, right? The credibility of Converse in up-and-coming music artists and punk and post-punk is bang on. It's a perfect space for them.
Okay, so last question on making a cultural contribution. The culture of our industry, right? Like, because I think it is a subculture. Like, actually, almost the entire premise of Meet the 85% in its name recognises that we're in a particular bubble, right? People call it Adland, right? What's your contribution to our culture of advertising? What would you like it to be? You know, you're only a year and a bit in. Let's pretend you've been doing this for 10 years. What would you like the cultural contribution you've made to advertising?
Big question. Who knows? I think the bubble is not a geographic thing, and I've had many conversations on this, and our business name is a bit misleading in that respect. But the Adland thing, the marketing land thing, is definitely a thing, and it's not just London. It's Manchester. It's Bristol. It's all over the place. It's Singapore. It's Portland. It's all these places. So the bubble is a mindset industry bubble, not a location bubble. I want to be clear on that. What do I want the contribution to be? I don't know. I'm yet to write that narrative. What I'd like to think it will be injecting reality into an industry that is scared of it in a way. And what we're finding is that our offering as a business isn't applicable to everyone. It scares a lot of clients. They obviously don't sell it, but you can see it in their eyes where that example I gave earlier about our observation about a brand's segments put a question mark against their segmentation study that they'd spent 2 years doing and spent millions of dollars on. They don't like that. They want certainty. But the reality is we don't live in certain times. People are not certain. We are self-contradictory. We contradict ourselves and each other. Our behaviors contradict what we say. Some clients really gravitate towards that because they understand they have a gap of knowledge, a gap of understanding, a gap of reality. A lot of them are quite scared of it. So I'm very comfortable with the fact that we're never going to work with the vast majority of brands because they don't want that provocative element of reality. And they like to throw stones out. Oh, it's only one person. Yeah, but it's one person's truth. It's one person's reality. They're like the homogenized data averages that make them feel secure.
I agree. I'm not sure that's where good ideas come from, but you can do the right kind of bland if there is such a thing, right? If you go down the homogenized data point route to doing it, I just think it'll always be a level of bland. Ultimately, for me, it manifests itself in the output of the brand, whether or not that's the services we build, the content we make, the stories we tell, whatever. If you start from an inherently bland observation, I couldn't even bring myself to call it an insight. If you start from there, what are you expecting? I remember you talking once when you came into Nonsense and you were like, oh, one of these interviews I did was with some guy that was basically an incel type guy. He'd been watching tape videos and had constructed a bit of a worldview around having seen that stuff. A brand, if they wanted to, could choose to directly address that area. There's lots of brands that stand for, and I haven't seen one talk about this once yet. I might just be not well read enough, but I just think by focusing on interesting things and making a difference in them, you get a ripple effect into the wider thing. Not everybody might be as engaged with the idea of trying to bust the incel movement wide open as I am. I think it's horrendous. I've got a son, right? And I just don't, the idea that you might end up down that path is abhorrent to me. But for other people, they're not going to care as much, but they're still noticed because brand X did something interesting, as opposed to if you go to what the homogenized insight might be there, it might be women are getting more empowered than ever and it's time for them to step it up to the next gear. And you're like, okay, we know what campaign we're going to get out.
There are two different things you just made me think of there. So on that first example, that's a guy that we went and met. I can't remember which brand it was for. And quite quickly, it became apparent he was a misogynist. We labeled him a misogynist. He didn't say that. But his views about women, his behaviors around women were not palatable to me as a human being, right? Our job as a researcher is to go and understand that person, not to cast judgment. That's an important factor to remember. The other thing is when we then share that back to the client was, as you would imagine, deeply uncomfortable with that, right? Okay, so he's the participant we've met. We've chatted them about your thing. Well, look at all this other stuff he said. And it was a conversation, right? Should we include his findings in that piece of work? And I was like, okay, if you choose not to include his findings in that piece of work, go through every survey you've ever ran, right? And find out who has similar views to him and take their findings out, right? Because the uncomfortable truth is people like him exist. Now, how they buy their holidays, yogurts, cars is a different conversation to his beliefs, but he is the same person.
Let's be honest. You didn't know he was a misogynist before you met him, but you knew people like him existed anyway. This is the thing that I think the brands would need to acknowledge about this, right? The uncomfortable truths, they're only uncomfortable because you know they're true. If you thought that they were bullshit, you wouldn't be made to feel uncomfortable about it. You know it's true. So if you know it's true, then I don't think you necessarily have a responsibility to act on it. You don't have a responsibility to try and fix bad stuff. You do have a responsibility to acknowledge at the very least the existence of that thing. And actually, if you know it's true, then you can bet your bottom dollar that the mass audience knows it's true as well, right? There are other dads worried about having an incel son. The phenomenon, uncomfortable though it is, of the rise in misogyny amongst young men, boys, is widely known. Like, why wouldn't it be acknowledged in a piece of research on behalf of a brand?
But this comes back to my point about reality first, brand second. When you employ that kind of research, you get confronted with things sometimes that exist, but you don't really want to confront. And in the end, it was a bit of a red herring because, of course, it wasn't that discussion we were interested in. But that is the same person. I think it's important to acknowledge this. The second thing I wanted to mention was your thing about interesting, finding interesting. I've just written this down. 3 parts to a project. What's the question we're asking? And sometimes we get asked to run research, and the question will be, tell me how we can sell more of our product. Tell me what people think about our product. Very product, brand-specific stuff. What we try and do is take a step back from that and think of what is the interesting research angle on that. Something that is at a higher level than that question. So instead of how can we get in more kids' lunchboxes, the research question would be, what's the importance of social situations for 7-year-olds at school, right? And the part of the conversation will be the role of food, of the lunchbox, of swapping, of talking.
You've broadened the question so that it includes scope for me to understand the people.
It's reality before brand. And it makes the conversation, the observation wider, which means you might spot those interesting things. And what it also does is you're giving more scope for the outputs. Yes, there's going to be a PowerPoint deck with some findings, but that's an interesting article. That's an interesting little video, 7-minute video documentary, I think. That we've talked about the answer, which is then how do you portray the answer, the outputs to someone? The third thing is where you come in, and what you do as an expertise is the leap that people take from those outputs. You showed me video about this. I've read the book and it says this. Because of this, I think I'm going to take it over here. And that leap, that's what a lot of creative agencies and brands, that's what they're looking for research to do, to give them the confidence and the reassurance to make that leap. A lot of that is the unknown. I'm a big believer in the power of creative ideas, a big believer in the power of creativity, and I'm a big believer in the power that not everything has to be tested to the hilt. Not everything has to have robust data to back it up, because we'll just end up in bland world if that happens.
Amen. I obviously completely agree with you. It's been a really great discussion, Mark. Thank you so much for your time. I go round beating a start acting credibly you lot drum a lot of the time. And an obvious question, well, where do we start? And potentially that is to find the interesting things. By the way, when you mentioned interestingness, we should do a bit of a sort of kudos to Russell Davis, who basically is the advertising's owner of interestingness. But I think where they can start is from input. If you make the input more interesting in the first place, it leaves you not much wiggle room, actually. You can only really go in a more interesting direction if you've learned more interesting things in the first place. And I think Russell actually says his first part of his answer of how to be interesting is be interested. Be interested in the audience and don't be afraid of what you might find. I guess final thought from me, I think there's a big crossover between the outputs of the kind of work that you do and a good creative idea. I see good stuff where brands just do a very good job of holding a mirror up to an audience and making them feel seen. And you get a lot of emotional resonance out of that.
100%.
Let's wrap it up there. But yeah, real pleasure, obviously, mate. And thanks very much for your time. And as usual, really interesting. That was Masters of Credibility. Cue theme tune.
And the Masters of Credibility.